Hello, sweet souls, and welcome to the We Are the Medicine podcast. I am your host, Dania Anastasia. I am a spiritual being having a human experience as a planter of seeds, alternative medicine practitioner, and trail guide on the path of life. We Are the Medicine is an exploration of the human experience through our stories. Our stories heal, our stories are our medicine, our experiences are our medicine. This is how we learn, grow, inspire, expand, and connect. My hope is that you will listen for inspiration and deeper understanding of how your individual life plays a role in that of the collective. I also hope to engage you, the listener, in conversations around your own dinner tables, in cafes and boardrooms, so that we may all begin to hold space for one another. Welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to We Are the Medicine episode with Claire Lafferty. In this episode, I have the honor of speaking and holding space with Claire, another brilliant soul who shares her experiences as our medicine. Claire Lafferty is a musician, a creator, an ardent traveler, a reflexologist, a holistic nutritionist, a yoga teacher and certified Ayurveda teacher, as well as an Indian head masseuse, playing with being an author, art dabbler, and lover of design. Claire and I met through our mentor, Melanie Maduri Phillips, whom I interviewed earlier this season. And we held space for one another in our class to heal and expand our own awareness of what it means to live our authentic truth. Claire, born in a small town in Ireland in the 1950s. At that time, Ireland not only was a country at war, was also a third world country struggling under the heaviness of the Catholic Church institution, colonization, and isolation. She set off at the early age of 20 to far off lands. Australia was the first, and then Canada, and the past 30 years or so in South America. She has been an ardent traveler ever since, having touched all continents on this planet, and finds it to be a fabulous education to immerse herself in other cultures and other spiritual practices, even though she comes from a deeply spiritual, magical, and mythical place within herself already. She loves talking to people, a little bit of a stickler for words, always been deeply interested in the esoteric, the spiritual, healing aspects of being, specifically music, which was a hugely impactful part of her early life in Ireland and onwards. Having taught piano for a while, and soon to buy herself a piano after many years of not having one, she loves music and sees it as another language. Welcome to the show, Claire.
Thank you, Donia. Nice to see you after about a year now, I'd say.
Yeah, it has been about a year. It's exciting to see your beautiful face. I have to comment, for the viewers who are listening to the show, you won't get the same impact you will if you watch it on the YouTube channel, but Claire's artistic style and love of design is evident the moment you see her. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think that was one of the first things that really drew me to you. I love your sense of style.
Well, I love it too. And, you know, it's a very interesting thing. I mean, as a teenager, more than a youngster, I grew up in a very small town. And I was kind of considered the snob, and she's just trying to be different. And look at her, what does she think she is? Because I had these fabulous clothes that my mother used to make for me. And I mean, it's just in me, you know, it's not something that I cultivate or I love it in me, but it's just in me. Yeah.
It's just who you are. I love it. And it's always been that way. That's so, I just love it. So I'm going to start this episode with a little bit of a icebreaker kind of question. So I would like you to describe the color yellow to someone who has never had the gift of sight. What would you say?
That's a challenge and a half, because obviously I'm going to be thinking of associating color with objects instead of feelings, which kind of goes with music. What do you see when you hear music? Or what language does music bring? So what language does yellow bring to me from my point of, in a way, I'm what's the word? I'm stuck, and yet in another way, it's another advantage to try and figure out. Right now, I have no idea. Yellow warm, it's heat. Well, there's heat is at least a feeling sensation. Warm is a feeling sensation. Bright without sight is I don't know what bright is without sight. The feeling would be, I think, what I go with yellow would be heat, warmth, tangy, citrus taste, sour, bitter. I'm going to stay with the senses on this because
yeah, absolutely.
Sour, bitter.
I like the citrus connection.
Yeah, with citrus.
Yeah. Definitely the lemon, right? The sour, the
bitter, maybe even astringent sometimes. The taste of astringents. The touch of aspero. What's aspero in English? It's oh gosh, I think of the word in English. It's like not smooth, not even rough either, but sort of sticky.
Oh, okay, like honey?
No, not as sticky as honey. It's like a sticky, bumpy, like little bumpy surface.
Okay.
So if you feel a lemon, you're not going to feel a smooth surface. You're going to feel a ridged, a slightly ridged surface.
Gotcha. I'm going to have to go into my kitchen later today and grab a lemon and close my eyes.
I'm going to do the same thing.
And all the listeners out there can go do that as well. I love it.
Yeah, and try a lime because they're different, you know.
And try a lime because they're different. You're right.
Different.
And then a banana is different too, but that's yellow. We could go all day on this.
And lemon, I mean, the color yellow suggests even in taste sort of heating.
It's also, I would think it smells clean, right? The color yellow might smell clean. I think of, well.
It also might smell sour.
That's true too.
Or it might smell like, I don't want that today. I don't want that today.
No yellow today, please. Thanks.
That's weird. Which comes easily.
So we're going to officially kick off this with having you explain in your own words, wherever you want to start, however you want to go about, but telling us a little bit about your life story and how you have arrived in this place and time that you are in this very moment.
Well, as you know, I was born in Ireland in a very small town in the 50s. Ireland was very, very poor, very, very governed by the restrictions of the church and also its history, being colonized and having dealt with that really for almost 1,000 years, I'd say. And I as a child, we had a great time. I was with this small town, was by the beach. We'd be out by the beach, by the sea, running around. You know, there was never any violence. And if anything, it did happen in the country, the whole country would know about it within a day, and there'd be big ooh and ha 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 ha. As teenage years approached when I went to school with the nuns. I questioned from a very early age, which caused a lot of trouble, let's say. And when I went to the nuns, I continued to question, and my questions became deeper and deeper and deeper. And it was a lot about the meaning of God and the meaning of life. And I look at these nuns and I think, hang on a minute, you're supposed to be preaching God. Call it what you want, I call it God. You're supposed to be preaching beauty, goodness, etc., etc. And what you're saying and what you're doing are two different things. And at the time, it really annoyed me. I was very, very angry about it and very confused about it. And my mother was English and my father was Irish. So that was another thing which I didn't realize at the time, was kind of a bridge to constantly be trying to get to the other side, which I never did. And I can't believe I just said that, but I did. And, it became apparent when, in more recent years, an acupuncturist said, "Oh, your mother was English and your dad was Irish." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "So there was a war before they even got into bed." And it never, I never even considered it. But it became, to me, Ireland became a very, very difficult place to be emotionally. I was kind of ahead of my time, I think, in a way. And I ran away at the age of about 20. I didn't know I was running away, but that's what I did. And it caused a lot of pain for me and for the rest of my family members. So then I became sort of the scapegoat for the war that had started before they even got into bed. And I put this all together now, and it's kind of funny. And yes, it was easy for Claire to be the scapegoat because she was never there. And I took on this role, I think, very early on in age, of being the fixer and the strong person and the rock and the this and the that and the other. And I'd come back from Australia and I'd listen to my sister going on about mom and dad, and I'd listen to my brother going on about them. And I used to say to them, we're products of products of products of products until somebody breaks the chain. And this is like I was 20. And I think I was even before that. It was in me waiting to come out. Now, it's as I see my life progress, I'm nearly 70, which is absolutely astounding. I can't believe it. I can't believe how quickly it's gone. But it's much easier to say that than embrace it internally and embrace it in a way that is going to help me. So some of the things that I've always noticed about myself and growing up in this society, which was incredibly depressed, shame, huge shame, depression never talked about. The way that the Irish people still deal with what's going on in the world now, it's kind of not there. We won't really talk about it. Our silence is our weapon. Well, silence is no longer a viable, valid, workable weapon in ways. And I struggled. I mean, I was doing yoga when I was 18. Now, people in Ireland hardly knew about yoga. When I went to Australia, I really did a couple of classes a week as something to do, but it was definitely a pathway for my being, me, who I was. And everyone thought I was a lunatic. I mean, since pretty well day one, I've been what was oh, you never tame her, was some of the comments that particularly men used to say.
You'll never tame her.
Well, it hasn't changed.
Good. Stay wild, Claire. Stay wild.
I think you probably already got that I was a little bit wild. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like it. I mean, I like being a questioner. I like being analytical. Sometimes I maybe take it a bit too far. And I had many issues in terms of emotional issues through my life, and some of them were not easy to deal with. I think I fell apart about 20 years ago, and it was the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. Ayurveda came to me before that issue happened, and I had Dr. Vasant Lad's books for many years before I met him. And I was in India. I've been to India many, many times, and I was in India and I broke my ankle. I was going to the Iyengar Institute, and he was in Pune because he's from Pune, and he was going to build a center outside Pune to help the poor people. So he was giving, $20, I think it was, for a consultation with Dr. Ladd to foreigners. And I said, oh yes, I knew someone that was studying with me. I said, God, I'll go, definitely. Yes. So as I say, I'd had his books, and I went and I lay down, and he took my hand, and he took my pulse, and he looked at my eyes, and he looked at my tongue. And he started to ask me incredibly personal questions, i.e., miscarriages. I'm thinking, hang on a minute, how the hell do you know this? And other very personal probing questions. And when I finished with him, he said something about this story is beautiful, but it's a bit this and it's a bit that. When I finished, I said, this is it, this is for me, because it makes so much sense that we can gather so much information about ourselves if we care to breathe and sit with. And I think sitting with the emotions that are hard to sit with allows grief, allows sadness. As I say, coming from a culture where grief and sadness were not really things that were talked about in a big way. Death was something very interesting because we used to have wakes. So the dead person would be sat up in the coffin in the corner, and we'd all have a party and drink whiskey. Sometimes they'd put a whiskey by the dead person, but it wasn't talked about. But it was definitely, in a way, honored, but it wasn't something that was talked about. Mm-hmm. And I have no idea how did I get to that from what I was saying before?
You were with Dr. Ladd.
Oh, Dr. Ladd, yeah. And so I came away from that, and as I said, I fell apart about 25 years ago, and it was very, very hard. And I kind of went through a stage of, oh my God, if this is it, just let me up onto the rooftops and I'd fly away. Anyway, I didn't. But I had met Dr. Ladd before that happened, and I was very lucky to be able to have enough resources to accept some of the things that were being given to me by another Ayurvedic practitioner in Vancouver, Jaisri Lambert is her name. She worked very closely with Dr. Ladd for a long, long time. And it really helped. I mean, it really helped me tremendously. But, I so wanted it. And I mean, I did the same thing with blood pressure. My mother was terribly, terribly, terribly wounded, and her blood pressure was dreadful. And I would go into the house and my blood pressure would go bananas. I mean, just bananas, just by walking into the house. And I remember going to my doctor. Well, he wasn't, because I don't really have a doctor, but he had been my mother's doctor when I was home on holidays or something. And he was shouting at me about my mother. And he said, Claire, listen to me, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, sure, Tony. And when you finished, you're going to listen to me, because I'm not going down that road. And I had been on medication, and I should be dead 10 times, but I'm not. And I'm not on any medication anymore. But I really wanted to break that chain. I wanted that movement. I wanted that freedom, I suppose. However, with that freedom comes a realization that the onion's never, I never quite get to the center of the onion. There's always a layer that comes out and, oh shit, there's more, So it's a never-ending story. And then, as you know, last year I was diagnosed with cancer, and I won't say it was hard, because it wasn't hard. It was very emotional. In ways, it wasn't terribly surprising. And in other ways, it was incredibly welcomed. And I go back now and I think about, okay, so usually or often I understand that a big hit on the head comes after maybe 2 or 3 years after a big issue, a big drama.
Sure.
And there'd been a huge drama around my father's death. That has never been resolved. It doesn't, I mean, it resolved in the way there was a big break in our family. Well, I have a lot to say about that. I think we're so conditioned to think that the family is the be all and the end all, and I think it's an absolute load of nonsense. So that was one thing that I look back now and I think, oh, I'm sure that has something to do with this diagnosis that occurred in my uterus. So I was back in Ireland after 50 years, rebirthing. And that's how I've looked at it right from the beginning of when I was diagnosed. And I'm not saying I didn't have down days, because I did, but those things that had followed me and waited in my body had now been taken out. And they hadn't only been taken out of my body physiologically, they had been taken out of my emotional body. They had been taken out of my spiritual body. My attachment to that thing of being the fixer and the rock and the tough one and the confident one kind of overnight disappeared. And that has been absolutely unbelievable. I mean, it is just such a a freedom marker for me. And in terms of yoga, I mean, I get irritated still sometimes when people say, what kind of yoga do you do? And I'm thinking, oh, I teach yoga. I got involved with the Iyengar thing. I went through the whole program. I learned a lot, but I didn't like the communities that were involved. So I really backed off a lot with that. And about 20 years ago, I met or heard of, and in fact, I'd heard about her a long time before I met her, a woman called Diane Long, who had worked with Vanda Scaravelli. And Vanda Scaravelli was an Italian aristocrat who had worked with Iyengar. She started when she was 45. She was a pianist, and she was very involved with the spine. So when she left India and didn't go back, and they parted company, kind of, she and BKS Iyengar parted company, she started to work a lot with the spine and the cerebrospinal fluid. And Diane lived with her for about 25 or 30 years, and before she died at the age of 90. And I started to work with Diane, having met her here in Dublin at a workshop, and all the other Iyengar people were at the same workshop. And I thought, my God, this is brilliant. And everyone else thought, oh my God, she's doing my head in, I can't stand it. And I thought, this is perfect. It's about finding the beauty inside. It's about the spine. The spine cages our nervous system. It's another pulse, it's another flow, it's another movement. It's so beautiful, and it's so deep, the practice. And working with her has been absolutely, I mean, groundbreaking, really and truly groundbreaking. And to put that together with Ayurveda, which, as you know, kind of brings in this whole aspect of what's going on in the world now, and how we are connected to the outside, and how the outside is connected to us, and how we're all basically one of the same thing, and how we in our own ways have created what's going on in the world now by not paying attention. And it's not much fun. But there's light and there's dark, and we need light to see dark and to see through dark. And I'm convinced that whilst it's difficult, or challenging more than even difficult, I mean, at the beginning of this, I was crying every 2 days because I was channeling a lot of stuff, and I had to stop. After 3 months, I said, my shoulders ain't able to hold all of this, and I wasn't, so I stopped. And it's fascinating, again, being back in Ireland for me, to see oh God, I won't even call it denial, because I walk into a shop and all of a sudden we'll be talking about it and we'll all be saying the same things. And I'm thinking, I'm so scared, because you never know, if you say A to somebody, they're going to be highly offended, or, it's a very...
feels supercharged.
Yeah. I think especially for those that do not want to address and see. So we come to addressing and seeing who I am, addressing and seeing who each individual is, and addressing and having the courage, and I don't mean that in an egotistic way at all, to go in search of that. Because somehow, if we deny ourselves, we deny the divine, we define the beauty that we've been given as an innate part of our being, and we deny the I. And that's something else I had actually a lot of trouble with until more recent years, when people would talk about I used to think, and again, I'm sure it goes back to my upbringing of, who does she think she is, saying I, and I did this and I did that and I did the other. And honestly, I had trouble with that until quite recently. It's not, it's not. People, when I have conversations with people, they talk generally and say you, and I think, and I stop them and say, no, I, because you're talking about I, so don't say you if it's I.
I think language, it plays it's huge. Language is everything, Claire. In our time together during the class, you kind of brought a few things up for me that I really hadn't considered. Most of the words that we use over here in America, they all have roots in Latin or Greek or ancient texts, and they don't mean what we think they mean, but yet we throw them around, specifically, the one word that always comes to my mind is vulnerable. Now, vulner comes from the Greek and it means to wound. So vulnerable literally means the ability to be wounded. And so my whole life, I guess my meaning, I thought that it meant to be sensitive, to be overly sensitive, right? Which is why vulnerability is a huge issue for a lot of us. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm just fascinated with your wordsmithing, and because we are from, different continents, language is a big deal.
Well, we're all wounded, and I come from a country that was desperately wounded, and I had a very wounded mother.
Yeah.
My father wasn't, but she was incredibly wounded. And somehow we're not given the opportunity in our everyday lives and in our education system to address the first wound, and I don't know where this is coming from, it's just kind of coming in and out, the first wound. And if we're not able to address the wound, how do we think in God's earth we'll ever be able to rise, be in a position to heal ourselves, so that we can then heal others, if that's what we so desire. And even just to heal ourselves is the first step. And wounding is part of being, I guess, and being wounded is part of being. And disassociating from that is, I think, a huge issue in depression.
And addiction, right?
And addiction and shame. And, this country in Ireland, I love it, and I'm so happy to be here, and I feel so comfortable. It's full of shame. It's full of addiction. It's had and I'm not saying it's any different from many other places, because it actually isn't, as I found out. So one of the things that really bloody well annoys me is when, the fighting Irish and all the Irish are alcoholics. And excuse me, not true. Yeah. Anyway, those nomenclatures that are branded certain nations. I think that if, like you just said about vulnerable, compassion. What's compassion? What's self-compassion? Why do we need to be gentle and easy with compassion for self before we can be gentle and easy with compassion for others? And I mean, I don't always do it by a long shot, but it's key. It's key to acknowledge the wound, to be with the wound, to whatever you need to be. If you want to be angry, don't deny it, don't suppress it. I mean, the suppression of anger, no doubt, had something to do with my diagnosis last year. And it's so interesting for me to, and I'm not scientific at all, or at least I don't think I am, but to see modern day science coming to those conclusions about the physiological effects of suppression, and to see and to be with, because I've never been involved with the medical system until I was in Ireland last year. It was atrocious. It was absolutely, I was thinking, oh my God. And I'm pretty, as you know, I'm pretty direct and pretty, if I ask a question, I kind of like an answer. And that just did not happen.
Yeah. It doesn't happen here either, Claire.
It's my body. I'm not a computer. I said this to my oncologist, I'm not a computer. I'm a person. And the poor guy didn't know what to say to me. Anyway, the first wound is kind of the last wound, isn't it? And somehow, I always think it's such a shame that we're not taught at a much younger age, because we come in, I think, knowing everything. We already have it. And as we go through life, it's kind of knocked out of us by one thing and another. And I think when most of us don't really realize that until maybe 40, 45, and the gaps start to show and become apparent and become more apparent, even though we might know it from a much earlier age in our own realm. It doesn't really hit the strings in the mind to say, oh, I need to look at this.
Yeah, and why do you think that is? That it, there's always been this thing called the midlife crisis, and this is usually what it is, right? Where people, I don't know if it means that they've finally realized that half of their life is over and they only have X amount of time left. So I better get my, my stuff together. And so being aware of how your life is going and how you are either loving it or fighting it all the time. I think people, at least of my age now, are looking for what it is that is their drive to live the next 50 years of the life or the next 30 years. Like, am I really going to be perpetuating the same drama that, and I don't know if even people are noticing, the drama, like you said earlier, noticing and being aware of how things and people and places make you feel. You actually can now make a choice based on how you feel about something. And if it doesn't feel good, if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no.
Mm.
And the wounds that we have and the conditioning that we've had to go through, I know for myself, those were words they weren't even literally in my vocabulary 2 or 3 years ago. And so, when I think I had a pretty good childhood, and then for the most part, it was good. I had what I needed. They provided for me in the ways that they were able to provide for me, but in the ways that really mattered, I completely lost, and as we all do, I think we lose all of that beautiful, innocent purpose that we are born into, which I guess is part of the midlife crisis, is now coming back to realizing who I am right now is not who I am.
Yeah, and I also feel that to have communion, i.e., communication, everybody has to want to be at the same table. Mm. And certainly for me, that was not the case. And I bashed my head against a wall for a long time and then said, "Feck this for a joke. I'm not doing it anymore." Mm-hmm. But I think to have, like, community is a big word, and community is a word to me. I don't like these buzzwords. I don't use them. I can't stand them. I don't like, what are some, community is a big buzzword.
Yes, it is.
People talk about it so much they haven't a clue what it is. Now, that's my interpretation. If you're talking about it so much, you don't know what it is. You're not in communion even with oneself. And I haven't been in communion with myself, and I still am sometimes, but sometimes I am. Mm-hmm. And it brings me now to another aspect of dealing with spirituality and yoga and ayurveda, because they're also connected. And I love India. I love India for it's filthy. I mean, it's filthy politically. It's filthy in every possible way, but it has everything in front of one's face, and one cannot escape it. And if you don't like it, you leave. But I think it is a brilliant place to be able to stand back and say, "Oh, I see that in me. Oh, I can deal with that. I see that in me. Well, maybe I don't like that so much. So I'll maybe look at going to Chulavanamala and going to Ramana Maharshi's ashram. It's beautiful, listening to some of the talks. And I think that community, like we are a community in ourselves, and we are a community of systems. We are a community of, I don't know how many billions of cells. If each of those cells doesn't have a light, and the light's not on, the community suffers.
If it's not getting what it needs, if it's not getting the water and the nutrition and the energy exchange, right? There's death. Exactly.
And I think that was, I was brought up in this thing, and this, like, Italy is the same. The family is the core. And I bought that, except I think inside of me I was saying, there's something not quite right for me here. And it wasn't quite right for me here. And there was a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort. And I used to say, oh, it was so sad that I had a very, very unhealthy relationship with my mother. And we really had a lot of things in common we could have talked about, but there was this thing that just wouldn't let go. And I would push, and the more I pushed, the more, of course, the resistance came. And it was very sad. Now it doesn't matter. We just have to find a way of easing into compassion for self, I think, and bringing that in gently. And that's a tall order too, I think.
It is a tall order, but to your point, you know, if we don't have compassion for ourselves, if we don't have compassion for all the baggage that we've carried forward so heavy, all the wounding and all of the ancestral lineage, you know, even your mother, you know, you were carrying her stuff for her.
Absolutely.
And you know, we all do that, specifically as women. I know the men do it as well, and it's just way different for them to express that or even acknowledge that. But for women, you know, when I decided at 16 that I was not going to have children, and that I remember distinctly saying to myself, this curse ends with me. And I had no idea what I was talking about. And I just got chills up and down my body just now when I said that, because, and now over the last several years, I have read more and more about women healing the wounds of our mothers, of our grandmothers, of all women in general, because we've just been so oppressed. And when I, you know, first hear that, I'm like, we weren't oppressed, blah, 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 you know, get off your crying box. But when I really sit and think about it and listen to the stories of women, and I see what actually has transpired in the feminine, oh my God, like that's what the curse ending with me meant. I think that I am here, I am making a stand of sovereignty over my body, and I get to choose, I get to say what happens. And then of course I went unconscious for about 30 years with alcohol, and now I'm back. So I think that all of it is, that's part of community, right? We have to bring ourselves, commune ourselves into a unit, into more unity with the divine, with Mother Nature, with Mother Earth, to heal, because this planet and this global community, it needs one of us on every corner, Claire.
No, yeah, and it's the I, and that I is not an ego I. That I is the I.
Yeah.
And I never wanted children, never, just because exactly what you said. I did not want to be perpetrating. I just didn't want that. Now, when I hit 39, all of a sudden I woke up and I, oh God, I have to have a child. It was total biological clock. I mean, it's like it's a total. Anyway,
Yep.
it never happened. It never happened. I spent 6-7 years, and then I thought, this is ridiculous. You know, I had miscarriages, I had a whole pile of stuff. No, this is ridiculous. And I thank God I didn't have children, because I had other shit to do.
Yeah, God had other plans for you. I mean, if you were meant to have children, you would have them, right? And you kept resisting, and unfortunately kept getting redirects.
No,
Redirects.
I mean,
And
I've had so many lessons, knocks on the head. And I think that we know more than we know, but we're not willing to address it, because it can be painful, and it can be highly painful. And we'd rather say, oh no, that'll deal with that later. I'm sure by the time you're dealing with it later, you've got a cancer diagnosis or whatever it is, you know. And we're not given any education on any level, really, as a society, in any society that I know. maybe for example, in the Dalai Lama, in all the Buddhists, I'm not sure that they've got the ideas are great, and some of them do, but I think most of them don't. We don't have the tools, we don't have the foundation to be able to work with that. And it's something that I never went to university. I hated school. I could never understand what all the fucking fuss was about it. I really couldn't. Now, I know my language is Irish. I'm not even going to apologize for it. I'm being kind of funny now. And I still don't. And there's such a lot of importance based on a piece of paper that says, yes, I got whatever percentage in this or that or the other. And I've seen it so very, 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 very blatantly in Chile, particularly because Chile is a very stratified society. And there are 5 universities that are the universities. And yet we have a friend who came from very, 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 very little, lots of poverty. And he's the brightest guy, and he went to a different university, and he didn't even know it until he said, oh, I didn't know it was so obvious that because I didn't go to the University of Catholic University, I don't get the same opportunities as somebody that did. But he's probably smarter than the somebody that did, because the somebody that did is part of the old boys club. And it used to infuriate me. And I'm thinking, what does it have to do with the price of eggs?
Yeah.
Absolutely bloody nothing. And wouldn't we be in ways better off when we look at, or when I look at some of the stuff that's going on? Well, it's not recent. I mean, it's the stuff that's going on now in the world has been going on for decades and decades and decades. Without all of that, and with something that was a little bit more self-compassionate to begin with grace. And, if we all, I think right now that we're being given a fantastic opportunity to take responsibility for ourselves, each one of us.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been a bit of a radical in that. I think I was a victim for a while, then I come out of it, then I go back into it again. And it's I won't say it's work, because I hate the word work. It's attention. That's what it's attention. It's attention to self. And I think that's what's really lacking in our world today. And I think we're being forced, I think the feminine energy is on a big rampage, and it's causing a bloody mess.
Mm-hmm.
But we've done it, and we've been a part of it, and there's so many lies around, and the climate, and there's so much nonsense. I mean, there's so much nonsense going on, that how people can't, the truth, what's the truth? How can people with intelligence, and this comes back actually to university as well, I can bring that into this, because people that have, a gazillion degrees and PhDs and whatever, and they're buying some of the stuff that's like, what? Where's the critical thinking? Where's the beauty? Where's the growth? Where's the community, your internal community?
Yes.
Where's the beauty in that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So let me ask you, with your background, with all of your study and your travel and your investigating of life, could you give the listeners maybe 1 or 2 or 3 of your top practices of, if one was to come back into alignment with their true nature, if one was to come back to the sense of compassion and community, what do you think would be your top 3 practices for that?
I think breath is the first one. I think breath, myself included, we take our breath so for granted. We don't really pay attention to our breath. We don't pay attention to where we are in the body with our breath. We don't pay attention to our emotions and our breath. We hardly even think of our breath. I mean, it is involuntary. However, we can become much more intimate with ourselves, and much more embrace ourselves in a much more powerful way, by becoming more attuned to the breath. And I mean, a couple of simple, just becoming, first of all, attuned to the breath. What happens when we're tense and we let go with the tension? What happens with our breath? And ask people that, and sometimes they're stumped and think, oh, And then one person will say, oh, we exhale. Yes. And it's fascinating. It's
It
absolutely
is. It is fascinating. That was actually in my yoga class this morning. I read a passage from Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul, and it was about contemplating death and how we go about our days so unconsciously, not even considering the breath, not considering that this life force, that if you ceased to take it in, you would cease to exist. And one day, in one moment, you will cease to breathe in again.
It's very fascinating. I was with my father when he died a few years ago, and he was a great guy. I really loved him a lot, and we had a good relationship. And on the phone, I wasn't even in Ireland when he was taken into hospital. He was 92 nearly. He broke his hip, and I phoned him, and he said, "Oh, they've gone to take X-rays, and it's a broken hip. It's the end of the line." And I'm thinking, "Oh, he's decided," and he had. And I got home, and he had gone downhill very, very quickly, and I was with him during the night. And just before he died, to watch the breath start to the time lapse between the last exhale and the next inhale, it was phenomenal. It was just fabulous. It was absolutely beautiful. I mean, he struggled the night before. It was incredible. He was like a stick. He was so thin, and he was struggling to get out of the cot. And I think, you can't, Paddy, you can't do that, you know. Anyway, it was just interesting to see the struggle, but then to see the peace when all of a sudden there was nothing, there was no breath, and it was really quite beautiful. And the priest the priest in Ireland has to, you know, put his nose into everything. Anyway, the chaplain came up and said, "How are you?" And I said, "Hey, I'm ready to dance." And he said, "You are? That's a really strange thing for a Monday morning, first thing when your father's just died." And hey, he didn't suffer that much, you know.
He was ready.
Yeah, and he was ready. He'd had it. I knew it anyway, but he'd had it. Yeah. So I think breathing. I think 3 words that I like to use, which I probably don't use often enough in my own life, are ease, joy, and space. And I like to laugh. And I enjoy my humor, even on my own. I enjoy my humor. And I love the banter that happens in Ireland, and the way that we can sort of belly laugh. And I think that's it's a great, in Ayurveda, as you know, the pitta is in the solar plexus. So the belly laugh in twists and in laughing can really help to release that pitta, to release the fire, to release the agitation. I think it's brilliant. I mean, I do have slight problems with this whole thing about laughing yoga. Can you not just say laughing classes? I mean, what's, you know, I don't know. I don't understand it all, but that's me. To each his or her own. And so it's breath, laughter, and the third one, ease, joy, and space. Space, well, space is I guess I'm referring more to an internal space. I'm very vata, so while space and air are part of my constitution, I'm also very scatty sometimes. Or I'm very, not scatty, but I'm very, do this, do that, do the other, do blah, blah. It's not always easy for me to create space.
And
yet
focus.
Yeah, and I need it more now than I ever did in my life. So that's something that I actually need to work with. And I'm right now, it's a bit of a mess because of all the stuff that's going on in the house and everything that has to be done and da-di-da-di-da-da. And the other thing I think I'd like to say around all of this is, just because I've said what I've said, and I've been teaching yoga and I've been involved in that healing, I've always had books about healing and herbs and nature and everything else, doesn't mean I'm better than anybody else or I'm better than the next one beside me. I think this is a huge issue in that world. You know, I remember my doctor saying, "But you've been doing yoga for all these years, you know, why have you got high blood pressure?" And I looked at him and said, "Excuse me, what are you talking about? You know, what are you talking about?" It's just a very clear way of maybe beginning to progress. There's an Irish, John O'Donoghue. I don't know if you know John O'Donoghue. He's dead now. He was a priest, and he left the priesthood, and he got married. He didn't leave the priesthood officially, but he got married. Oh, you should hear some of the things he says. I mean, I can't repeat them because I've actually said some of the things he said myself, but I don't even know what they were anymore. But It's the most beautiful, beautiful, beautiful things. And coming from Ireland, I think it's, for me, it's very special because this place is full of magic. It's full of spirituality. It's full of fairies. It's full of fairy rings that are sacred. It's full of mythical history. It's full of, and it's not religion. It's a much deeper,
Mhm.
I think you'd love it. It's a much deeper, it's in the land. It's,
I have a feeling I'll be visiting you there one day, but I just wanted to, just last month, a friend emailed me a retreat, a silent, kind of a silent spiritual retreat center down near Asheville, North Carolina. And I think this place was taken right out of the Irish history books. The gentleman who started it 15, 20 years ago, the entire place, it's about 15 acres right now at the edge of a national forest. So it's surrounded by thousands and hundreds of thousands of acres of protected land. But it's a spiritual retreat center, and you go for quiet, for silence. And his story is very interesting as well, but he has Celtic roots.
Mhm.
And when he said he finished his family obligations, he decided to travel. So he went to India and Scotland and Ireland, and really connected with the Celtic lore and the mysticism and the fairies. And so he came back to the United States and he created this entire world where there's, you know, 100-foot bamboo trees and chimes and little gardens of little gnomes everywhere and fairies. And it was interesting because I lost my ring while I was there. And I mentioned it to him. I said, if you happen to find it, let me know. And he kind of stood back and smirked and he said, you know, those fairies, they like those pretty shiny things. They'll give it back. And the next day, I found it. So it feels like that's what Ireland would feel like for me. And I had just the most
maybe,
amazing.
yeah, maybe parts of it. I think West Cork, Cork is just, it's so special. The west of Ireland. I mean, Dublin's kind of, it's diluted, I think, too much now. But certainly
Yeah.
parts of the country are phenomenal. And I mean, I get, I'm very, I'm very, I'm what's the word? I'm very sensitive to the connected communication between me and spirit, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Sometimes I don't want it because it's not always particularly pleasant. And stuff comes to me. Oh yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
And words come out of my mouth. It comes in. If it comes into my head, it's not something I think. It just comes in and out. And it's not always very welcome. Oh, it was very funny. I have to tell you, I was at a singing group the other night on Monday, and we finished the singing and we were holding hands and we had to say something we appreciated about ourselves, and then we had to say something about the person who beside us on the left-hand side. And it came to the person on my right-hand side, and she said what she appreciated about herself. And then she turned and she said, and Claire, I appreciate her directness and her straight truth telling. And I laughed and I said, a lot of people don't like that about me, Anna. Thank you.
I would so much rather have a straight shooter than someone just blowing smoke, really.
I have trouble with it. Yeah.
So we're gonna end.
Take the leap is another word. Take the leap of faith.
No matter what that looks like for you, right? Just take the leap.
Yep.
So I'm going to we're going to do just a couple more questions here, but is there anything specific that you want to promote or call attention to with your own practice, or what you are doing, all your little passion projects over there, so that if people were interested, they can join you virtually or anything? Is there any place that
Sure,
we can.
I'd like to. Well, I think I can. I've given you my Facebook page, my wellness page,
Yes, I will put that in the show notes. Yep,
and my yoga address. Yes, I'd
good.
be putting up some. I'd like to do some breath work. They're short. They'd be short pieces, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes. I also am looking at still thinking of doing like 2 or 3 words and really putting that out so people can. I mean, I have a couple of words that are so misused, and I really pick it. And people actually, they don't like to be picked on the words they use. And I think, well, let's look at this. Let's look at why don't you like it?
Hmm.
Um, 2
Yep.
or 3 words, and how do they fit into how you see those words, and where they are appropriate for what you think they are appropriate for, which they may not be appropriate for.
I love that. I love that. I think we do need a re-education of language.
Yeah, I think
I
words
really
are
do.
very important.
Um, so final question for you. Um, what do you, how do you cultivate your own joy and peace and contentment within your own heart, within your own life these days?
I meditate. I've been meditating for a long, long time, twice a day. And when I don't feel as peaceful and as easy as when I do. And if I miss my 2 o'clock meditation, my afternoon's not the same. So I think for me, meditation is one of those things. I do a TM, transcendental meditation.
Okay.
I think also my yoga practice. It can just be a 20-minute practice, but a very present practice. It's something that when I don't do it, I miss it. And with everything that's been going on with my health and everything, I'm getting a little bit confused about my eating habits, because some of the foods that it's all very interesting, all this stuff on the food. And I've been in this Ayurveda thing for such a long time, but it's like almost against the grain, but I have to be taking this into account in terms of what some of the other naturopathic medical fields see and think.
Yeah.
It's I think food is huge, and I think that our food, and not just our food, and this is another one of my hobby horses, which started about 20 years ago. Food, the politics of food. We can talk about. I was thinking the other day. So, if we eat grass-fed beef, does that mean it's good beef? Because who knows what the soil was that the grass is growing out of? And
Exactly.
it's just such a sickness. And what's happening now with food, and I mean, Ireland, when I grew up, there were no people that were oversized, they just didn't exist. And now India is the same. It's like, it's full. And with stuff that's going on with food and the soil and soil health, and Sadhguru, who I'm sure you know, maybe you don't, but I think he's a hoot.
Yes.
He went to the Middle East last year on his motorbike to talk about
I just saw an interview with him that he talks about that.
place, but he does such good things.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
So I
Yeah,
think
he actually talks about his interviewer said something about how America raises their kids and whatnot, and he stopped him immediately. He's like, wait, you don't raise children, you raise cattle.
exactly.
So our whole dynamic, our whole
But that's
language
language. You see, that's language.
around language, right?
Like you don't grow chickens,
No, you don't.
God.
But I totally hear you on that food issue. You know, I've been on the genetically modified kick for over 2 decades now, and finally people are still asking questions of what GMOs are, and it just astounds me that that the majority is just still so okay with buying food in a box and thinking that it's nutritious. I was raised with gardens, and at dinner time, mom said, go get 12 ears of corn and 2 tomatoes for dinner. Like, that was just how it was. So when I left and went to college, moved away, I was like, what is this? This says it's corn. Like, corn is actually from a stalk, right? So I got really confused. So I can only imagine anyone who's never had the blessing and the ability to grow their own food to even really grasp what the food industry is And honestly, we're allowing it to happen because
Well, I was just going to say we are allowing it to happen, and it's, you know, the health system isn't a health system; it's a disease system, and it's keep them sick. And the food is not healthy food; it's keep them sick, and because somebody's making a whole shitload of money out of it.
yeah.
And I can't believe I just said every. It's all about money, but it's not all about money because, as you say, we don't pay attention, and we were in, you know, we're filled full of advertising and bullshit and nonsense, and
Mhm.
not enough. The excuses, we haven't got time.
Yeah.
But we're being made to do that as well. We're being made to run around like stupid chickens. I don't have a cell phone, an iPhone. I have a little Nokia that size.
Nice.
I don't need one. I don't want one. It's becoming much more difficult for me not to have one if I want to be involved in groups. It's becoming very, very difficult, but I'm trying to hang out. But I mean, we are being enforced. And it's that to me is evil. And I don't like good and bad, and I don't like right and wrong, and I don't like good and evil. But I've used evil in the past 3 years a few times.
Well,
There's a
it
lot of
doesn't resonate with you, right? It feels totally incomprehensible that, 90% of the planet is really, I guess, thinking that they're okay with that, with how things are. And until you come up against a life crisis or something that turns everything upside down for you to start looking at your life and what you're doing, and are you making the most um, positive choices for you, um, they're never going to need a reason to question it. So I applaud you for being the investigator and the questioner and the bringer of light in so many different ways. I am a kindred spirit with you on several levels, being the scapegoat, being the black sheep, being the the one who wanted to heal our deep-seated ancestral traumas.
Yeah, well, you know, but it's all around us. I mean, if we can't see what's going on now, that like we're hooped, and I don't think we are hooped. I think that what's going on now can't. I think it will eventually dissipate. I know the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi 50 years ago, apparently, my doctor that I go to here is a medical doctor, and he's an Ayurvedic doctor, and he's Irish. He's old, he's about 80 now, I'd say. But he was very closely entangled with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi predicted everything that's happening now. Well, of course he did. I mean, it was going on then, and it's just, and you know, you've heard about the indigo people, I suppose, and they're all these new souls that have been brought in as the light. And I mean, it sounds so cliche, and I know it does, and I don't really like that, but it is light, and it is light and dark. And we are, in my opinion, in a darker place than even Nazi Germany, much, much darker.
But I also think that we may be feeling that we're in a darker place because all of the
Light
light
stage are coming.
bringers are coming forward. And
Yeah,
there needs to be a little bit of a balance. And the more light, the more darkness. And eventually, I think it's all just going to collapse into
I
itself.
think so. I think so too. You're right. I think the light is showing the dark. There's more light to show the dark. Yeah, I agree entirely.
Oh, it has been such a pleasure to talk with you. I can't wait to get my airplane ticket to come see you sometime.
Thank
Maybe
you.
in the
Thank you.
next year or so. I think that would be a lot of fun. You can show me all the old haunts.
Some of the
And
old times. Oh my God. Thank you for asking me. It was great. I enjoyed it. I love this kind of
good. I'm
interaction. Thank
I'm
you,
so
darling.
glad. You're very welcome. So we will say goodbye and thank you for listening.
And that wraps up another episode of We Are the Medicine podcast. Wanted to take a moment to thank you and to let you know that I am grateful and I appreciate you so much. I see you, I hear you, I do understand. If you feel called, subscribe to my channel, like, share, comment with it, and check out my website for future happenings, daniaanastasia.com. That's all for now. I love you so much. It's crazy.